I still remember that morning, the kind that should have started with coffee and quiet birdsong. Instead, it started with the sound of hammering and bulldozers. I walked out to my porch, still in my slippers, and froze. Across the tree line, where my grandfather's old field used to be, stood 9 brand-new houses, rising out of the dirt like weeds after rain. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. But no, there were workers, concrete mixers, and even banners that said Meadowbrook HOA Expansion, Phase 3. Here's the thing, that land, all 15 acres of it, belonged to me. I inherited it 2 years ago. So imagine my face when I realized the local HOA had built an entire neighborhood on my property. Now here's the twist, those same people, they're paying me rent every single month. Yeah, you heard that right. Before I tell you how I turned their biggest scam into my best investment, comment below where you're watching from in your local time, then hit subscribe because you're not going to believe what happened next. When I first inherited my grandfather's land, I thought it would just be a quiet place to grow old, maybe build a small cabin, fish at the pond, and stay away from the noise of the suburbs. 15 acres of untouched soil, a few hundred yards from the edge of Meadowbrook, a place famous for its manicured lawns, strict HOA rules, and overzealous board members. It wasn't much to anyone else, but to me that land was family history. My grandfather cleared those woods himself in the 1,950 seconds. He'd always told me, Tom, land's the only thing they can't make more of. Protect it. And I did. Or at least I thought I did. 3 months before that insane morning, I had taken a consulting job out of state, short-term, easy money. I locked up the cabin, left the gates chained, and drove off without a second thought. When I came back, my land was unrecognizable. The old oak trees that lined the driveway were gone. The field where my grandfather's barn used to stand had been flattened and paved over. The small creek had been rerouted into a storm drain. And there they were, the foundations of 9 identical suburban houses, each with framed walls and shiny new roofs glinting under the sunday. At first I thought it had to be a mistake. Some kind of government project, or a road expansion, or maybe even a private development that accidentally spilled over the boundary line. But as I walked closer, something hit me. These weren't random builds. The signs, the style, the brick colors, everything screamed Meadowbrook HOA. I walked right up to the site. There were men in hard hats, blueprints spread on the hood of a truck, cement trucks idling by the road. One guy, the foreman, looked like he'd been running this circus for weeks. I waved him over. "Hey buddy," I said, telling me what's going on here. He barely looked up from his clipboard. "This is Phase 3 of Meadowbrook Estates, sir. 9 new family units. HOA approved. You'll need to stay behind the safety tape." I blinked. Phase 3? There isn't a Phase 3. This land doesn't belong to Meadowbrook. He frowned like I was the one who was confused. Sir, all of this was approved by the board. We've got permits." That word permits echoed in my head. I knew how construction worked. I'd spent years as a civil engineer. You can't just start building houses without land ownership records, survey plats, and county clearance. "Who signed those permits?" I asked. He flipped through his folder and tapped the corner of a document. HOA Meadowbrook. President's signature, Linda Prescott. The name hit me like a slap. Linda Prescott, the infamous HOA president. A woman with more power than the mayor in her little suburban kingdom. People called her Karen with a clipboard. I'd heard rumors she fined people for grass length, banned holiday lights, even had someone's mailbox removed because it was the wrong shade of beige. But this was next-level insanity. I told the foreman he was trespassing on private land. He laughed like it was a joke. "You'll need to take that up with the HOA office, sir. I just follow the plan." Then he walked off. For a few seconds I stood there in the red dust, the sound of hammers and drills echoing around me. I looked down at the soil under my boots, the same dirt my grandfather once plowed, and realized something very simple and very dangerous. Someone was trying to erase my family's legacy for profit. That night I didn't sleep. I pulled out every piece of paper. I had deeds, surveys, tax, receipts, everything. The legal description of the property was burned into my brain from years of helping my grandfather with paperwork. Lot 18, County Parcel 47B13, beginning at the old maple tree at the north corner. I traced the map line by line. Everything lined up. Every inch of those houses sat squarely inside my boundaries. To double-check, I went down to the county recorder's office the next morning. The clerk there, an older man named Vince, had known my family for decades. When I showed him the map, he frowned. "Well, that's odd," he muttered, scrolling through digital plat records. "According to this new submission, your property was reclassified last year under a community expansion overlay." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't sign anything like that." He sighed. "I didn't think so. The form's got someone else's name on it, Linda Prescott, but she attached a copy of a land use map that says your acreage was part of an abandoned tract. My blood boiled. Abandoned. I'd been paying property taxes every single year. I had proof. Vince leaned closer. Tom, if you didn't authorize this, she's in deep trouble. You might want to lawyer up. I left the office with my heart pounding. Back at home, I stood on my porch again, staring out at those 9 nearly finished homes. Men in reflective vests laughed, tossed lumber, and drove nails into walls on my land. I called the HOA office that afternoon. Their secretary answered in that overly polite voice only HOAs seem to require. Meadowbrook Estates, this is Carol, how may I help you? This is Tom Bennett, I said flatly. I own the property adjacent to your subdivision. I'd like to speak with your president. One moment, she said, and after a few beeps the line clicked. Then I heard her. Mr. Bennett. Linda's voice was sugar-coated venom. I've been expecting your call. Have you? I said. Then you know you're building on my land. A pause. Then a calm, patronizing laugh. Oh, that's what this is about. Mr. Bennett, your deed references the old survey line. That land was annexed under our new boundary plan last year. Perfectly legal. Annexed without the owner's consent. I don't need to educate you on property law, sir, she said sharply. If you'd like to file a complaint, you're free to do so, but construction will continue. That was the moment I knew this wasn't ignorance. It was theft with a smile. I hung up, sat back in my chair, and just stared at the papers on my desk. The anger in me wasn't hot, it was cold, calculated. I'd spent my career designing structures, calculating load and resistance, and now I was looking at a different kind of structure, one built on lies. That night, I went out to the property with a flashlight. I walked along the perimeter, taking photos of the survey stakes, tire tracks, and construction signs. I recorded videos, geotagged them, even measured distances myself. When I reached the end of the 9th lot, I saw a metal post jammed into the soil, marked with a spray-painted tag, Phase 3 boundary line. Underneath it, barely visible, was my grandfather's old wooden survey marker, half buried, but still there, the one he'd set himself 50 years ago. That was all the proof I needed. I remember whispering into the night, "You picked the wrong land, Linda." From that point, the anger turned into something sharper. I wasn't just going to stop her, I was going to make sure she'd regret ever touching this property. But first, I needed to understand what she had done and how deep her web went. Because if she could fake a boundary, forge a permit, and build 9 houses on someone else's land, then she must have thought she was untouchable. And me, I was about to prove her wrong. The next morning, I decided to pay the Queen herself a visit. If Linda Prescott wanted to play power games, I was ready to walk right into her castle. The Meadowbrook HOA office looked exactly like you'd imagine a place run by a control freak. A beige, 2-story building, trimmed hedges, cut into perfect squares, and a parking lot lined with signs that said resident parking only, violators will be towed. Irony never looked so smug. I walked inside carrying a folder stuffed with my land deeds, survey maps, and photographs. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and overpriced candles. A receptionist with an artificial smile asked, "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't," I said calmly, "but she's about to want one." When Linda finally emerged from her office, she looked exactly like the urban legend. Every suburbanite fears short blonde bob, bright pink blazer pearls, and that deadly look that says I've never been wrong in my entire life. Her clipboard was practically glued to her hand. "Mr. Bennett," she greeted me, smiling like a politician on camera. What a surprise. Not as surprised as I was, I replied when I found 9 houses built on my land. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it got colder. "Oh, that misunderstanding again. You see, that property was rezoned last year as part of the community's expansion plan. I assumed you had been notified." "Notified? You mean the fake survey you filed at the county office?" Linda raised an eyebrow. "Fake? That's a serious accusation." I placed the folder on the table and slid a copy of my original deed toward her. "Not as serious as building multi-million-dollar homes on someone else's property." She didn't even glance at it. "Mr. Bennett, let's be reasonable. The community needs growth. Your land was underutilized, overgrown, frankly. We've improved it. This development will raise property values for everyone. Everyone except me," I said. Linda sighed, tilting her head in mock sympathy. "You don't understand how zoning works. These things happen all the time. You should be thanking us. The HOA has turned your unused field into a neighborhood." My jaw tightened. "That's not a neighborhood, Linda. That's grand theft with landscaping." Her tone sharpened instantly. "Careful with your words, Mr. Bennett. The HOA can pursue defamation if you continue spreading false claims." There it was, the classic HOA defense mechanism, threats and intimidation wrapped in legal buzzwords. "Go ahead," I said with a smirk. "Sue me. You'll have to do it from the 9 houses sitting on my land. Her eyes flickered just for a second. That tiny flash of uncertainty told me she knew I was right, but then she regained her composure and switched to her favorite tool, arrogance. You're welcome to bring your concerns to the next HOA meeting, she said sweetly, but construction will continue. It's in everyone's best interest. Oh, I'll be there, I replied. And I'll bring the best interest of the county recorder, a real estate lawyer, and about 20 angry homeowners when they find out what you've done. That's when her smile finally cracked. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You don't know who you're dealing with, Mr. Bennett. I've been president of this HOA for 15 years. People around here trust me. No one's going to believe your little story. I leaned forward slightly. We'll see who they believe when the headlines read, HOA, President builds luxury homes on private land. Her cheeks turned pale. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed back into her office, slamming the door behind her. The receptionist gave me a nervous glance. Sir, please, relax, I said, gathering my papers. You'll probably want to find a new job soon. That was the moment I knew the war had begun. Over the next few days, I started digging deeper. Through public records requests, I discovered the HOA had submitted altered boundary maps with signatures that didn't match the county surveyor's handwriting. Linda had even stamped them with a fake seal, a cheap attempt to make them look official. I spent hours cross-referencing old maps, aerial images, and archived permits. The evidence piled up like bricks. Then came the twist, the why. Through a contact at the zoning office, I learned that Linda had been sitting on a secret deal with a private developer. Her plan was simple: build 9 luxury family homes on my land, sell them before anyone noticed the zoning discrepancy, and pocket the profits personally. She'd already accepted 7 down payments. 7. The arrogance was breathtaking. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. Still, I knew I couldn't just accuse her. I needed proof solid enough to crush her in court. So I started building my own case. Every night I went back to the construction site. I recorded everything: timestamps, photos of trucks entering after hours, the names of contractors on their vests. I even hid a small trail camera on one of the old fence posts. One evening, while filming from the tree line, I overheard 2 workers talking near the truck. Man, you think this whole expansion's legal, one asked. The other laughed. Legal? You think Linda cares? She just said, build fast and shut up. That was gold. I had video, audio, and documents, a full arsenal. But the real jackpot came from an unexpected source: the residents themselves. One afternoon, I was at the local cafe, and a middle-aged couple sat next to me, David and Rachel Miller. They recognized me from around the area and started chatting. When I mentioned the construction, Rachel's face turned red. Don't even get me started, she said. That woman fined us $500 for having our recycling bin out for 10 extra minutes. She acts like she owns the whole county. I leaned in. What if I told you she might have built 9 homes on land she doesn't own at all? Their jaws dropped. Within minutes, they were telling me everything: how Linda bullied residents into silence, ignored board votes, and ran the HOA like her private empire. Apparently, she'd also forced out 3 previous board members who questioned her decisions. That's when I realized something: this wasn't just about my land. This was about power unchecked and rotten. The Millers offered to help. If you ever take her to court, we'll testify. Everyone here's terrified of her, but if someone stands up first... I nodded slowly. That's all I needed to hear. That night, I scanned every document, labeled every file, and sent digital copies to a lawyer friend for safekeeping. I wasn't going to lose anything mysteriously if Linda tried to play dirty. By the end of the week, I had a timeline: the falsified map submission, the permit approval under community expansion, the signed developer contract with Linda's initials, the deposits from homebuyers wired directly to her personal account. It was a full-blown scandal waiting to explode. The only thing left to do was decide how I wanted it to explode. Part of me wanted to file a lawsuit, immediately burn her to the ground, legally speaking. But another part of me, the engineer, the planner, wanted something more poetic. I thought of my grandfather again, of what he used to say when I was impatient as a kid. You can't force a foundation to dry faster. Let the weight of it set in, and it'll last forever. So that's exactly what I did. I decided to wait. I would let Linda build her 9 perfect houses, let her dig her own grave 1 brick at a time, and when the paint dried and the buyers moved in, I'd make my move. From that night on, I stopped being the victim. I became the architect of her downfall. When I decided to play the long game, I also decided I wasn't going to be reckless about it. Revenge without a plan is just theatrics. I wanted results. So the morning after I promised myself patience, I called the one person I trusted to turn a scrap of paper into a legal sledgehammer, Sarah Chen, a real estate attorney I'd met years ago through a project. Sharp mind, no nonsense, and she loved a good puzzle. She arrived at my kitchen table with a coffee and a laptop like a prosecutor about to try a case. I laid everything out: the deed, the county plat maps, photos, timestamps, the overheard audio from the construction crew. She scanned in silence, then looked up with that calm that makes your blood both cool and nervous. Someone forged a boundary, accepted down payments, and built 9 houses, she said, naming the obvious like it needed naming. You have evidence of intent emails, deposits, altered plats. That's not a survey error, that's fraud. What's the fastest way to stop this? I asked. Sarah smiled, small and professional. You could injunct the site, get the court to halt construction, and force an immediate freeze. But there's a downside: you stop them now, and Linda's going to scream persecution. People who already put down deposits will demand refunds. She'll call it a witch hunt. The rumor mill is powerful, sometimes stronger than truth. I thought of the houses newly finished shiny, with buyers already picturing move-in day. If I stopped the build now, sure, I'd win on principle, but I'd also leave Linda room to spin a narrative: victimized HOA aggressive landowner disrupts community progress. No, Sarah was right about perception. What if I let them finish? I asked, surprising even myself. Let the houses stand, let buyers move in. Then when it's full of people and contracts, I make my claim. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Bold, risky, but effective. If those homes are finished and people have invested, a judge will be damned reluctant to throw families out without a plan. You could leverage that. You're thinking ownership first, then negotiate terms that favor you. Exactly, I said. Make the cost of eviction higher than the cost of negotiation. She nodded slowly. Okay, we execute 2 tracks. 1. Gather airtight proof of fraud and corruption: emails, bank receipts, chain of title discrepancies, developer contracts. 2. Quietly build public sympathy and secure witnesses. If neighbors and buyers believe you're fair and reasonable, that helps. I'll file a confidential notice with the county recorder so nothing mysterious disappears from the record. We set to work like a pair of surgeons. Step 1 was evidence consolidation. Sarah taught me where to look for the stuff that mattered: the developer's escrow account details, time-stamped permit applications, the contractor's invoices, and any communications that showed Linda's hand. I started combing through my files, then through public records online, then I started making calls. David and Rachel Miller were my first recruits. They weren't heroes, they were just fed up. After Linda fined Rachel for a flower bed she hadn't planted, they'd been simmering. When I showed them deposit slips and an email that looked like Linda telling the developer to close sales before county review, they agreed to testify. People are scared of her, David said, tightening his jaw. But we've been scared too long. We started meeting in secret. At first, we swapped stories, small things like surprise fines or threats to enforce aesthetic codes. Then the conversation turned practical. Rachel offered to reach out to a buyer she'd chatted with at the grand opening. Maybe the buyer would talk. David, who worked as a claims adjuster, dug into insurance forms and noticed Linda had instructed the contractor to list the property under a company name she controlled. That was a breadcrumb trail to follow. Meanwhile, I walked the perimeter nightly. I set up the trail camera in a place only an old farmhand would know to check near the ancient maple my grandfather used as a reference point. The camera caught deliveries, men signing documents in the back of trucks, and one night a contractor carrying a sealed envelope into a gray sedan. I retrieved the SD card like it was a gold bar. Back at Sarah's office, she made quiet Freedom of Information Act requests and filed for certified copies of the permits. The county, bless their slow bureaucratic hearts, produced a digital paper trail that didn't match. The Phase 3 submission had been uploaded with an incorrect parcel number, a scanned signature that didn't match the signature file. The county held on Linda and the smoking gun, an attached PDF titled Sales Plans, Final, Revised 2, Doc X, with track changes still visible. Someone hadn't scrubbed it properly. Inside the track changes were notes like, call buyer, re-expedited closing. Don't disclose survey yet. It was a rookie mistake or hubris. Either way, it was enough. I also got creative. If Linda thought the community would back her, then I needed the community to hear a different voice. I started quietly talking to neighbors outside HOA meetings at the diner at the church bake sale. I never yelled. I told the story plain and I let the documents speak. People listened. Once a few voices joined in, especially families who had been burned by arbitrary fines, the narrative shifted. I wasn't a vindictive landowner. I was a steward fighting a con. Linda's reaction was predictable, and to an extent, entertaining. She escalated. She put up a sign at the development Meadowbrook Expansion Community First. She held a press-friendly groundbreaking celebration and invited a local real estate blogger to take photos. She leaned into optics, smiles, handshakes, cupcakes, but her emails and the trail camera footage sat like rust under the paint. She also tried the intimidation route. I received an anonymous letter, folded with the perfunctory threat, "Drop it, Tom. This is bigger than you." Her people tried to buy silence contractors' offers to settle with cash, and a late-night message left on my door that someone had taken care of the boundary markers. Someone had indeed tried to rip my grandfather's old wooden peg from the earth, but they did it clumsily, leaving the post splintered and a smear of white paint that matched the back of a Meadowbrook maintenance truck. I photographed the damage, logged the incident with the county, and pasted it into a file she couldn't deny. The most audacious move was a private message from a developer liaison, probably thinking it would intimidate me. "We can make this go away," the message read. "We can compensate. Think pragmatically." My reply was simple. No compensation. Transfer the lots to my name or I'll take what the law allows. Then Linda called. Her voice was cool, the patronizing tone back in place. "Mr. Bennett, I'm trying to resolve this quietly. No need to make waves." Quietly, I laughed. "You built 9 houses on someone else's land. Quiet isn't on the menu." She hung up. By the time the houses neared completion, I had enough evidence to choke a courthouse. Sarah filed a sealed notice with the county flag's suspicious transactions with the State Real Estate Commission and prepared a packet for the buyer's attorney because if buyers were being defrauded, they'd be allies too. I could feel the tempo shift. Linda's smirk was getting tighter. Her moves were faster and sloppier, like someone trying to outrun a collapsing bridge. Meanwhile, my moves were methodical documents, copied witnesses, prepped a public story beginning to form that favored fairness over chaos. And beneath it all, the trap was forming exactly as I'd planned. Let them finish the houses. Let them take the deposits. Let them stand proud at a ribbon cutting. Then when the foundations were set and the mortgage papers sent, I would step into the middle of their parade and hold up a stack of deeds that would not be ignored. I slept better knowing that when everything finally came to light, it wouldn't be a rant against a bully, it would be a legal, undeniable accounting of what had been taken. The difference, I told Sarah, between cheap revenge and justice is evidence. We were stacking evidence like bricks. Now the question was only timing. The houses were almost done. The buyers were almost in. And the next part of this story, the one where I crashed Linda's grand opening like a very patient wrecking ball, was coming up faster than either of us expected. They finished the last roof truss on a humid Tuesday. For weeks, the site had smelled of fresh lumber and drywall dust. Nail guns fired like staccato applause. Delivery trucks came and went. The 9 houses gleamed under new gutters and clean windows, each one staged with tasteful faux plant centerpieces and those little stack of brochures on kitchen counters that scream "Move-in ready." Linda had outdone herself picket fences, a white ribbon across a tiny model home entryway, balloons tied to mailboxes. She wanted the optics to be flawless. She wanted witnesses who would remember the story the way she told it. She booked a local realtor, a real estate blogger, with a camera and 2 community leaders to cut a ceremonial ribbon. The press release called it Meadowbrook Expansion, bringing affordable luxury to our neighbors. I heard about the ceremony through a neighbor's text, grand opening Saturday, 10 a.m. Linda's really going for it. That was all the invitation I needed. On the morning of the event, the street in front of the development was lined with SUVs, folding chairs, and people in 2 bright polo shirts. The developer had set up a small tent with lemonade and tiny sandwiches, astroturfed charm, meant to mask the stink of greed. Prospective buyers wandered through the model home, as if already picturing their furniture. A realtor gestured grandly to the new kitchen island. Linda stood on a little stage pearls, glinting her smile surgical. I didn't intend to crash the party, not at first. I planned my entrance like a surgeon, plans an incision, precise, calm, and unavoidable. I parked my truck at the end of the road, walked up the gravel drive, and let the noise wash over me. Up close, the scene looked absurd. Balloons trembling in a mild breeze, a ribbon cut with ceremonial scissors that had probably been rented from the party store. Linda saw me before I reached the tent. Her smile flickered, then tightened into a measured expression practiced in front of mirrors. She didn't expect me to be composed. If she'd hoped I'd scream or collapse, she was disappointed. I walked straight up the little aisle between the model homes and the gathered crowd, carrying nothing but a thin leather folder. People glanced at me, some with curiosity, others with the polite discomfort of folks about to witness a public argument. Good morning, I said into a microphone one of the reporters had left on a folding table. The sound carried oddly. The noise dropped like someone had zipped a bag shut. Linda's hands flew to her chest like an offended duchess. "Mr. Bennett," she said with a breathy, fake warmth. "This is a private event. I thought you'd like to hear a friendly announcement," I said. I opened the folder and slid a set of certified copies across the table until they reached Linda's polished nails. They were simple documents, county-certified deed, an old survey from my grandfather's files, and an overlay map showing the exact footprint of those 9 houses squarely within my parcel lines. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is that his deed?" A murmur ran through the assembled buyers. The realtor's smile stuttered. The blogger's camera lens tilted toward me. "You built 9 houses on my land," I said plainly. "You signed permits under a forged submission. You took deposits for homes you had no legal right to sell." Linda's face, always composed like a wax figure, made a tiny human crack. "That's preposterous," she said. "You must be mistaken." I pressed a finger to a specific point on the map, the old maple tree marker my grandfather had driven into the ground decades ago. "This marker is still there," I said. "It's documented. These houses are on Lot 18. Your signature appears on an altered county submission. The buyers wired deposits into an account that traces back to an LLC associated with you. I have audio of a crew member saying, 'Build fast and shut up.'" Silence settled like a heavy curtain. For a moment it felt like all the air in the world had evacuated, everyone breathing against the same pressure. I watched as the faces in the crowd changed: confusion, anger, fear. The buyers I'd never met looked suddenly very vulnerable. A woman I'd seen earlier admiring a kitchen island grabbed the arm of her husband, whispering, "What are we supposed to do?" Linda's first move was to call security. 2 men in cheap black jackets appeared like stage props. "Sir, you can't do this here," one said. "This is private property." "It's my property," I said. "I think the crowd should know that." "Sir," he started, then stopped when a voice from the crowd cut through. "Wait," said a man holding a baby, one of the buyers, maybe stepping forward. "If this is true, we paid for houses on someone else's land. I want an explanation." Others shouted in agreement. A ripple of outrage moved through the chairs. Linda's composure wavered and then collapsed into frantic damage control. She apologized in that practiced way, fast, loud, and full of words that tried to fill in the silence. "There must be a clerical error," she declared. "We'll investigate it immediately." Several buyers glared at her phone cameras already recording. One woman demanded to see receipts and contracts. The realtor tried to shepherd people inside the model home like a Pied Piper, trying to keep them distracted. A man in a suit, someone from the developer's company, approached me with a forced smile. "We can arrange refunds," he said. "We can work this out privately." I could have accepted that. I could have demanded refunds, civil litigation, or punitive damages. But the strategy I and Sarah had cooked up weeks before, let them finish, let the community invest, then leverage that investment, was working. The more people emotionally tied to those houses, the more leverage I'd have to force a settlement that protected the buyers and gave me the upper hand. "How about this?" I said, turning to face the crowd. "These families didn't know they were being lied to. I'm not in the business of evicting people from houses they thought were legally theirs, but I am in the business of justice. I want this resolved in a way that doesn't ruin innocent buyers." Phones came up everywhere, the clicking of camera shutters like a dozen tiny trumpets. Someone started a live feed. The narrative was changing in real time, from Linda's staged glamour to the darker story of forged papers and secret accounts. By the time I left the event, the local blogger's feed had thousands of views and more than 100 angry comments. The buyer who demanded receipts approached me as I walked toward my truck. "Sir, thank you for telling the truth," she said, tears brimming. "We thought we'd lost our savings. What happens now?" "Now," I said, and felt a strange lightness. "We slow down the panic. Let the paperwork breathe. Let the law do its work. We settle this fairly." I folded my hands and walked away. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. But I watched Linda standing in a cluster of her supporters, her smile rigid, her eyes already darting for damage control. I could see the strain lines in the corners of her mouth, the tiny tremor that happens when someone realizes the ledger is about to be balanced. That night, the town hummed with rumors. The next morning, there was already a story on the local news: HOA expansion in question after developer conflict. The headline didn't name names, but everyone in Meadowbrook knew where to point. The trap had closed. The houses stood finished, glossy and whole. The buyers had keys in their hands, hopes in their hearts, and now a growing suspicion. Linda had staged the perfect celebration, and in doing so, she had given the community witnesses, paperwork, and public witnesses to the moment when the truth arrived. I had wanted it obvious. I wanted the people affected to see it with their own eyes, to feel the betrayal. That would make them my allies later when the law did its work. My long game had created a stage and a cast. All that remained was to bring the script to the courthouse. The Monday after the so-called grand opening, Meadowbrook looked like a storm had passed, not a physical one, but a social hurricane. Buyers were furious. Contractors refused to show up for warranty work. The HOA message board, normally filled with cheerful posts about yard sales and pet photos, had become a courtroom of accusations. And right in the middle of it all sat my letter, 9 copies of it certified, and stamped hand-delivered to Linda, the developer, and every single new homeowner. The message was short, precise, and devastating. Dear occupant, the parcel upon which your home sits is legally titled to Thomas Bennett. You are currently residing on private property without authorization. You have 2 options: cease occupancy and remove all structures within 60 days. Enter negotiation for tenancy under the rightful owner. Failure to respond constitutes trespass. T. Bennett, no threats, no emotions, just law in black ink. By noon, the HOA office phone must have melted from all the calls. Buyers demanded answers. One man drove straight to Linda's house and banged on her door until a neighbor called the sheriff. The story hit local TV. By evening, homeowners discover their new houses may be built on wrong land. Linda tried to spin it, of course. She went on camera outside her pastel brick house pearl necklace, trembling under studio lights. This is a misunderstanding, she said. Our development was fully approved. We're cooperating with county officials to clear up a clerical error. Clerical error, my foot. Meanwhile, Sarah filed formal complaints with the State Real Estate Commission and the County Zoning Board. Each came with its own stack of attached evidence: the altered plats, the bank deposits, even screenshots of the developer's contracts where Linda had inserted her LLC. When the investigators arrived, they didn't come quietly. County trucks rolled into the neighborhood, workers with clipboards marking boundary lines, survey drones buzzing overhead like flies. Neighbors peeked through blinds as orange tape appeared around the new homes. Someone snapped a photo of the scene, and within hours it was online with the headline, HOA Queen's Empire under investigation. That night I got a call from Linda herself. Her voice wasn't honeyed anymore, it was sandpaper. You think you've won, Bennett, she hissed. You've destroyed innocent families. You're going to pay for this in court. I kept my voice calm. You built 9 houses on stolen land. The families didn't destroy themselves, you did. You're a cruel man, she spat. You could have kept this quiet. We could have worked something out. I tried quiet, I said. You ignored quiet. She hung up, but not before muttering something about making calls at the county. I almost laughed. She still believed she had influence left. 2 days later, the first court hearing was scheduled. An emergency injunction Linda filed to halt harassment and interference. The courthouse lobby smelled like panic and perfume. Linda arrived in a beige pantsuit with a lawyer who looked barely out of law school. I walked in wearing jeans, boots, and a calm expression that probably annoyed her more than any insult could. Inside, the judge, an older man with patience worn thin from HOA drama, adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Prescott, you are asserting ownership over land deeded to Mr. Bennett. Linda's lawyer stammered something about boundary discrepancies and historical annexation. The judge turned to me. Mr. Bennett, do you have proof of your claim? I slid the packet across the bench: deeds, tax, receipts, surveys, timestamp satellite imagery, even my grandfather's notarized record from 1974. It was a massacre, polite, silent, and legal. The judge's gavel came down. The burden of proof falls on Mrs. Prescott. Until verified otherwise, the property remains in Mr. Bennett's name. Construction or sale activity on said land is hereby suspended. Linda's shoulders stiffened. The HOA's lawyer tried to protest, but the judge cut him off. Counselor, when you find a case precedent where someone can accidentally build 9 houses on private land, let me know. I didn't smile, but I wanted to. Within days, HOA board members started jumping ship. One by one, they resigned, citing personal reasons. Rumor said some of them had received subpoenas. The developer's company froze all accounts tied to the project and sent out formal letters of suspension pending investigation. The whole machine Linda had built, the illusion of control, the web of favors, started unraveling like cheap thread. But here's the funny part, I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth did the heavy lifting. Still, Linda wasn't done trying. Late one night, a silver Lexus parked near my gate. I went out with a flashlight and found an envelope taped to the post. Inside was a handwritten note. Tom, let's end this. I can make it worth your while. $250, 0 inches cash. You sign over a lease exemption, and we forget the rest. No one gets hurt. A bribe delivered like a peace offering. I kept it as evidence. Sarah's face when I showed her was priceless. She actually wrote this in ink blue ballpoint, I said. With a heart over the I in her signature, Sarah shook her head. We're adding extortion and bribery to the file. At that point, it wasn't even anger. I felt just a kind of grim amusement. Watching someone dig their own grave, one shovel of arrogance at a time, can be disturbingly satisfying. By the time the formal trial date arrived, Linda's house looked deserted. The manicured lawn was overgrown, the HOA logo peeled off the office door. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. The courtroom that day was packed. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, cameras rolling. The buyers, now organized as a group, sat behind me. David and Rachel were there too, quietly smiling. Linda's lawyer tried to argue technicalities, jurisdiction, survey, misprints, clerical intent, but the judge wasn't buying any of it. The county surveyor himself testified that Linda's map had been digitally altered. The bank records showed transfers to her private account labeled consulting fees. When Sarah presented the note offering me a bribe, the courtroom gasped. Linda closed her eyes like she'd just realized the game was over. The judge ruled in under 20 minutes. All 9 houses as fixtures on the land are property of the rightful landowner, Thomas Bennett. Furthermore, the court ordered the HOA to compensate for legal fees and damages caused by fraudulent use. I remember the silence that followed, not celebration, not chaos, just the sound of inevitability landing. Outside the courthouse, the buyers surrounded me. What happens to us now? One asked. You'll stay, I said. I'm not taking anyone's home. You'll sign fair rental agreements. You'll pay me, not her. There were tears, some of relief, some of disbelief. A few hugged me. Someone whispered, "You're not like her." That meant more than any judgment could. That evening I sat on my porch watching the sunset burn gold across those 9 rooftops. The phone buzzed Sarah again. "Congrats, landlord," she said. "What are you going to do with 9 houses?" I chuckled. "Collect rent. Maybe hang a sign that says, 'Built by greed, owned by karma'?" She laughed. "You've got away with words, Tom. But remember, you earned this the hard way." And she was right. The HOA's empire was gone, Linda's reputation buried under court filings and scandal headlines, and my land, my grandfather's land, stood free and profitable again. Still, I wasn't gloating. Revenge wasn't the victory. Ownership was. That night, as the cicadas sang outside and the cool wind swept through the fields, I opened a new bank account labeled Meadowbrook Rental Income. The first deposits would come soon enough. And somewhere in the quiet dark, I could almost hear my grandfather's gravelly laugh saying, "Told you, boy, land's the only thing they can't make more of." The news broke before I even had time to drive home from the courthouse. My phone buzzed nonstop calls from reporters, texts from neighbors, and one particularly dramatic voicemail from a local radio host who wanted to get the exclusive from the man who outsmarted the HOA. I ignored them all. I just wanted silence, the quiet satisfaction that comes after months of fighting tooth and nail and finally winning. But as it turns out, winning a war of paper doesn't end when the judge bangs the gavel. It's what happens after that separates the smart from the spiteful. That evening, I met with Sarah in her office to draft the next step. She laid out the settlement plan with her usual crisp precision. "The court's decision gives you full ownership of the land and any structures built on it," she said, tapping her pen against a notepad. "Legally, those 9 homes are now yours. You could evict everyone and sell them if you wanted." I looked at her over my coffee. "Evict 9 families, not my style." She nodded approvingly. "Then we negotiate rental contracts. You become their landlord. Everyone wins except Linda." The idea sounded poetic in a way that made me grin. Linda Prescott had built her suburban empire on arrogance and lies, and now every month a piece of that empire would quietly wire money into my account. It wasn't just justice, it was poetic income. The following week we arranged a community meeting. The new homeowners gathered inside what used to be the HOA clubhouse, a building that now technically belonged to me too. There were folding chairs, a pot of burnt coffee, and the unmistakable hum of anxiety. I stood at the front, papers in hand, wearing the same calm expression that used to infuriate Linda. "Good evening," I began. "My name's Tom Bennett. You've probably seen my name in the news this week. I'm here to talk about how we move forward, not backward." Some crossed their arms, others looked exhausted. One woman raised her hand. "So, are you evicting us?" I shook my head. "No. I'm offering you something better: security. You can stay. I'm not here to punish anyone. You were lied to, same as I was. That got their attention. I laid out the new contracts, 5-year leases, at $2,500 a month, which was well below the local market rate for new homes of that size. The rent goes toward maintaining the properties and settling the damage caused by the previous HOA administration, I said. In short, you get to keep your homes, and I get compensated for what was taken. A man in a polo shirt looked skeptical, so we'd basically pay you instead of the HOA. Exactly, I said. Except I don't fine people for having Christmas lights up in February. That earned the first laugh of the night. A few chuckles turned into murmurs of relief. By the time I finished answering their questions, the tension had softened into something like gratitude. By the next week, 7 of the 9 homeowners had signed the lease agreements. The other 2 were still deliberating, but Sarah was confident they'd come around once the reality of the situation sank in. I'll never forget the feeling of seeing those first signatures on paper, the same kind of paper Linda had once forged to steal what wasn't hers. Except this time, every signature was voluntary, fair, and transparent. Meanwhile, the HOA was collapsing under its own weight. Linda had resigned for health reasons, though rumor said she'd been forced out after a unanimous board vote. The remaining board members scrambled to distance themselves from her issuing public apologies, and even offering to help with transition paperwork. The phrase Meadowbrook expansion scandal became a permanent stain on every Google search tied to the community. Local news stations aired segments calling it a landmark case in HOA accountability. Reporters framed me as a kind of folk hero, the calm engineer who beat the system with its own rules. It was flattering, sure, but I wasn't looking for fame. I just wanted normalcy, and maybe a little bit of revenge wrapped in peace and quiet. Linda, on the other hand, was facing criminal charges. The county had officially charged her with forgery, wire fraud, and real estate misrepresentation. Her attorney tried to negotiate, but the evidence was a brick wall. The once invincible HOA queen now spent her days sitting in a courtroom while her empire rotted away. Sometimes karma doesn't knock, it bulldozes. A month later, I stood in my kitchen one morning sipping coffee and checked my online banking app. 9 transactions blinked in neat rows. Rent, Meadowbrook Lot 1. $2,500. Rent, Meadowbrook Lot 2, $2,500. And so on. $17,500. Every single month. I couldn't help but laugh, not out of greed but out of disbelief at how full circle everything had become. The land my grandfather once used for hay and horses was now generating passive income because a power-hungry woman thought she could outsmart a man who actually reads his deeds. Sarah called that morning too. "Congratulations, Mr. Landlord," she teased. "How does it feel to be the owner of an entire cul-de-sac?" I chuckled. "Feels oddly peaceful and profitable." "You've made the local bar association newsletter," she said. "They called it one of the most creative settlements of the year. Apparently your case might set a precedent for future property disputes." "Glad to be of service," I said. "Just don't let them put my face on a billboard." As the dust settled, the neighborhood started to heal. Without Linda's dictatorship, the residents formed a new board, smaller, transparent, and focused on actual community improvement. David and Rachel were elected co-chairs, and the first thing they did was abolish most of Linda's absurd rules. No more lawn inspections, no more fines for mailbox paint shades. They even invited me to their first official neighborhood barbecue, which, according to Linda's old bylaws, would have been a violation of noise and odor regulations. I showed up with a tray of ribs and a 6-pack, and for the first time in months, everyone laughed without fear of being reported. At one point, David raised a beer and said to Tom, "The man who taught us that paperwork is mightier than the HOA." Everyone cheered. I just smiled. Weeks passed, and the once contentious Phase 3 neighborhood transformed into something real, not an HOA kingdom, but a small, self-sustaining community. The kids played on lawns without being yelled at. The mailboxes stayed whatever color people wanted. The rent checks arrived on time. Linda's old house went up for sale, though I heard through the grapevine that no one in Meadowbrook wanted to buy it. Some said it was cursed. I didn't disagree. And as for me, I spent my evening sitting on my porch watching the sun dip behind those 9 rooftops that used to mock me. Now they glowed orange in the fading light, silent monuments to patience, persistence, and poetic justice. I thought back to the day I'd first walked onto that construction site, the confusion, the anger, the disbelief, and then I looked at my land now organized, peaceful, lawful. It wasn't just a victory, it was a transformation. Maybe that's what true justice looks like. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that rebuilds stronger, cleaner, and undeniably fair. As the first cool breeze of autumn swept across the fields, I smiled to myself. They thought they could take the land, I murmured. But the land took them instead. And that, I realized, was the real ending Linda never saw coming. 6 months after the judgment, the world felt strangely still. The chaos, the lawyers, the camera crews, all of it had faded into a quiet hum of normal life. Or maybe not normal exactly, more like earned peace. Most mornings began the same way now. Coffee at 6, newspaper by 7, rent deposits by the 10th. I'd log into my account, see those neat little digital lines, 9 payments in total, and smile. They weren't just dollars. They were reminders that patience beats panic and paper beats power. The old 15-acre field that my grandfather once used for cattle now looked nothing like it did a year ago. The 9 houses stood in 2 clean rows along the gravel lane, their driveways lined with maple saplings that were already turning red that autumn. Children rode bikes past my porch shouting hellos. The air smelled of cut grass and barbecues instead of wet cement and diesel. Funny thing, I'd become the neighborhood's favorite landlord. I never wanted to be one, but once you're the guy who saved 9 families from eviction, people treat you differently. They waved when they saw me at the farmer's market. One woman even baked me a pie every first Sunday of the month as a thank you for not being Linda. Linda. Her name still made people flinch. Last I heard, she'd sold her house quietly and moved 3 counties away. The court had ordered restitution, but she'd already drained her savings, paying legal fees and penalties. The once unstoppable HOA president had turned into a cautionary tale whispered over coffee, "Don't pull a Linda." Rumor said she tried to start a new HOA somewhere else, but after reporters caught wind of her name, the board dissolved before it even began. She'd gone from queen of the suburbs to suburban exile. I didn't hate her anymore. In a weird way, I pitied her. She wasn't just greedy, she was convinced the world owed her control. Maybe that's worse than greed. One chilly afternoon, I sat on my porch with David and Rachel, my 2 unexpected friends in this entire mess. We grilled steaks on a small charcoal pit and laughed about how far things had come. David held up his beer and said, 6 months ago this street was a war zone. Now it feels like a neighborhood again. Rachel nodded. You could have kicked everyone out. You didn't. That's rare. I shrugged. My grandfather used to say, you can't build fences higher than your conscience. He believed in fixing what's broken, not burning it down. They both smiled. Still, David said 17 grand a month for just existing, that's one hell of a revenge story. I laughed. Call it passive-aggressive income. We all cracked up the kind of laughter that heals old wounds. By summer, the transformation was complete. The county officially reclassified the development under my ownership, renaming it Bennett Grove. I didn't choose the name, the residents did as a surprise. They even installed a wooden sign at the entrance. Welcome to Bennett Grove community, built by mistake, saved by patience. I nearly choked on my coffee the first time I saw it. They also invited me to their new Community Appreciation Day, which was really just an excuse to throw a massive barbecue and laugh about everything we'd survived. The kids made handmade "Thank You Tom" banners. There was music, food, and not a single HOA fine in sight. At one point, a middle-aged man came up to me, one of the homebuyers I hadn't spoken to much before. He shook my hand and said, I thought you'd be bitter, but you're probably the calmest man I've ever met. I smiled. That's because bitterness is expensive. Patience pays rent. The truth is, wealth wasn't what I'd been chasing. What mattered most was reclaiming the story, my family's land, my name, my peace. The houses were just the physical proof that I'd done it right. Still, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. The HOA that tried to bury me under bureaucracy had accidentally built me a retirement plan. Each month's rent went into a separate account. From that, I funded a few personal projects, things I'd always put off. I built a small lakeside cabin at the far end of the property, the one my grandfather always dreamed of. It had cedar walls, a wide porch, and an old rocking chair where I spent my evenings watching the light change over the water. I planted fruit trees, apple, pear, cherry, not for profit, just because it felt good to grow something real again. Sometimes the new residents would visit. The kids helped me plant the trees, chasing each other around with watering cans. On weekends, David would come over to fix something, and Rachel would bring her famous potato salad. It wasn't just property anymore. It was community. A few months later, I got a letter from the County Board of Planning. At first, I thought it was another bureaucratic headache, but when I opened it, my jaw dropped. A developer, not the same crooks as before, had offered to buy the entire property, including all 9 houses, for triple its market value. Apparently, Bennett Grove had become prime real estate because of all the media attention. They wanted to turn it into a heritage, smart neighborhood. Triple. I read the offer twice, then folded it neatly and stared out the window for a long time. It wasn't about greed, it was about legacy. I thought of my grandfather, of all those years he worked this land, of how I'd fought to protect it. Selling would be practical and poetic in a way. Linda's empire had tried to steal from me, and now her very failure had made the land more valuable than ever. A week later, I signed the deal. After all taxes and fees, I walked away with a multi-million-dollar check and zero debt. The buyers shook my hand and said, "Mr. Bennett, it's been an honor working with someone who understands patience." I smiled. Patience is what built this place, literally. When the new owners took over, they invited me to cut the ribbon at the ceremony. I stood there, scissors in hand, surrounded by cameras again, but this time it was different. There were no lies, no forged maps, no fake boundaries. Just clean lines, honest work, and the faint smell of barbecue drifting from somewhere down the street. As the ribbon fell, I felt something loosen in my chest. Closure. That night, I returned to my cabin by the lake. The water rippled under the orange glow of dusk. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, leaned back in the rocking chair, and listened to the crickets start their evening chorus. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the lawsuits, the laughter that came after. I realized I didn't just win a case, I'd rewritten a story. The same land that had nearly been stolen had now become the foundation for my freedom. The same woman who thought she could crush me had unknowingly built my fortune. Somewhere out there, Linda was probably still fuming, still blaming the world for her fall. And maybe that's the difference between us. She fought to own people. I fought to protect what was mine, and somehow ended up with both peace and profit. I smiled to myself and whispered, "You did good, Grandpa. You really did." The moon rose over the water, silver and perfect. The reflection shimmered across the surface like a mirror of everything that had come full circle. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry or proud or vindicated, just content. Because sometimes karma doesn't hit hard, it just pays rent on time. If there's one thing this entire ordeal taught me, it's that patience and proof are stronger than rage and noise. When the HOA took my land, my first instinct was to fight fire with fire, to yell, to threaten to tear everything down. But anger burns fast. Paperwork lasts forever. In the end, I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I was right, and because I never let them drag me into their chaos. What Linda tried to steal with arrogance, I reclaimed with calm. Every signature, every record, every photograph, they were bricks in a wall of truth that no one could knock down. So here's the lesson. Protect what's yours, but protect it smartly. Know your rights. Keep your receipts. Learn the system better than the people who abuse it. Because power isn't always in money titles or committees. Sometimes it's in one man quietly saying, "No, that's mine," and proving it line by line. And maybe the sweetest revenge isn't seeing your enemy lose. It's watching justice turn their greed into your steady paycheck. To anyone out there who's ever been bullied by an HOA, a boss, or a self-appointed Karen who thinks the rules don't apply to them, stay calm, stay sharp, and never underestimate the power of patience. I turned theft into income chaos, into community, and revenge into rent. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. Now, tell me in the comments, have you ever stood your ground against someone who tried to take what's yours? And don't forget to subscribe, because more HOA karma stories are coming soon.